Captain Lee was having another boring day checking old space junk near Jupiter when his scanner started beeping like crazy. Something big was out there, drifting between the broken pieces of old ships and asteroids. He thought it might be valuable. Salvage, maybe something he could sell back on Earth. As his small mining ship got closer, Lee could see it wasn't human technology. The pod was smooth and silver, with strange blue lights flickering weakly along its sides. It looked like it was dying, just like everything else in this graveyard of space debris. "What the hell is that thing?" Lee muttered to himself, carefully maneuvering his ship closer. He'd been mining the asteroid belts for 5 years, but he'd never seen anything like this. The pod was maybe twice the size of his cargo bay, and it was spinning slowly in the darkness. His computer couldn't identify it. No human database had any record of this design. That meant only one thing. This was alien technology. Real alien technology. Lee's heart started beating faster. First contact protocols said he should report this immediately to Earth Command, but something made him hesitate. The blue lights on the pod were getting dimmer. Whatever was inside, it was in trouble. Lee made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of calling for backup, he extended his ship's mechanical arms and carefully pulled the pod into his cargo bay. The moment it was inside, his atmospheric sensors went crazy. The pod was leaking some kind of gas, and the temperature was dropping fast. Through the pod's transparent front panel, Lee saw something that made him freeze. Inside was a person, or something that looked like a person. She had pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly, and long silver hair that floated around her face. Her eyes were closed, and she wasn't moving. She was dying. Lee didn't waste time thinking about protocols or procedures. He grabbed his emergency medical kit and started working on the pod's seal. The alien technology was completely different from anything he knew, but desperation made him creative. Using his plasma cutter, on the lowest setting, he carefully opened the pod. The alien woman was barely breathing. Her skin was cold and had lost most of its glow. When Lee checked her pulse, her heart was beating so slowly he thought she might already be dead. That's when his computer finally gave him some useful information. The atmospheric analysis showed the pod contained traces of crystalline compounds, the same stuff Lee used to fuel his mining equipment. His ship was full of the stuff. Without really understanding why, Lee crushed some fuel crystals into powder and mixed them with water. He didn't know if it would help or kill her, but doing nothing definitely meant she would die. He carefully placed a few drops on her lips. The reaction was immediate. Her skin began to glow brighter, and her breathing became stronger. The alien woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing bright purple irises that seemed to look right through him. She was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Lee had ever seen. And now she was alive on his ship, thousands of miles from Earth, with no way to communicate and no idea what she might be capable of. Lee realized his quiet mining operation had just become the most important moment in human history. Nari's eyes opened slowly, like someone waking up from the deepest sleep of their life. Lee was sitting next to her in his tiny medical bay, holding a cup of the crystal mixture he'd made. When she saw him, her whole body tensed up like she was ready to fight or run. "Easy there," Lee said softly, raising his hands to show he wasn't holding any weapons. "You're safe. You were dying in that pod." Nari tried to speak, but only strange musical sounds came out. Her voice was like nothing Lee had ever heard. It reminded him of wind chimes mixed with whale songs. She looked around his cramped medical bay with wide purple eyes, taking in the human technology that must have seemed primitive compared to her own. Lee pulled out his tablet and activated the basic translation program that all mining ships carried. It was designed for emergency situations with colonists who spoke different Earth languages, but maybe it could handle alien speech too. "Can you understand this?" Lee spoke into the tablet, and it converted his words into simple pictures and symbols. Nari's face lit up with surprise. She pointed at herself and made those musical sounds again, slower this time. The tablet's screen flickered as it tried to process her language. After a few minutes, broken words started appearing. "Me? Nari, hurt, ship, gone." Over the next hour, they managed to piece together her story. Nari was from something called the Veil Collective, traveling with her family when raiders attacked their transport ship. She'd been put in an emergency pod, but something went wrong. The pod had been drifting for weeks while she slowly starved. Raiders took family, the tablet translated, and Lee could see the pain in her glowing eyes even though he couldn't understand her expressions completely. Lee felt something twist in his stomach. This woman had lost everything, just like he had when his mining station was destroyed 3 years ago. But at least he'd had other humans to help him. Nari was completely alone, millions of miles from her home. "You need more of this, don't you?" Lee held up the crystal powder. When Nari nodded eagerly, he made a decision that went against every safety protocol he knew. Lee spent the next 2 days rebuilding part of his ship's food synthesizer. He took apart his emergency systems, rewired his mineral processors, and even cannibalized parts from his communication equipment. Nari watched every move he made, her purple eyes following his hands as he worked. What amazed her wasn't just that Lee was helping her, it was how he was helping her. Humans weren't supposed to be very advanced, at least according to what her people had heard. But Lee was solving problems her own engineers would have needed weeks to figure out. When Lee's jury-rigged machine finally produced its first batch of crystalline nutrients, Nari's skin glowed so brightly that the medical bay looked like it was filled with moonlight. She looked at Lee with something that might have been wonder or gratitude, or maybe just shock that a stranger would risk his own survival to keep her alive. "Why?" was the first clear word the translator gave him from her speech. Lee thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "Because you needed help, that's what we do." Nari stared at him like he'd just said something completely impossible. In her world, apparently, that kind of kindness between strangers wasn't normal. But for Lee, it was just being human. After a week of steady meals and rest, Nari was moving around Lee's ship like she owned the place. Her skin had that bright glow back, and she seemed curious about everything. Lee would catch her staring at simple things like his coffee maker or the way he brushed his teeth, like these everyday human activities were the most fascinating things in the universe. The translation program was getting better, too. Nari was a quick learner, picking up basic English words while teaching Lee some of her language. Her people called themselves the Keth, which meant something like those who flow with the deep currents. Lee thought that sounded way cooler than just calling themselves humans. "This food," Nari said one morning, pointing at Lee's instant breakfast, "tastes like metal and sadness." Lee almost choked on his coffee, laughing. "Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's not supposed to taste good, just keep you alive." He opened up his small emergency supply of real food, a chocolate bar he'd been saving for months. "Try this." When Nari tasted chocolate for the first time, her whole face changed. Her eyes went wide, her skin flickered with different colors, and she made a sound that was definitely the alien version of, "Holy crap, this is amazing." "Your people make this magic?" she asked, holding the wrapper like it was made of gold. "We make lots of things just because they taste good," Lee explained. "Not everything has to be practical." That seemed to blow her mind completely. Among the Idios Keth, everything had a purpose. They didn't waste resources on things that were just for enjoyment. But humans would spend months perfecting the taste of something that had no nutritional value just because it made them happy. In return, Nari started showing Lee things that made his jaw drop. She could look at his navigation charts and immediately spot problems that his computer missed. When Lee was struggling to plot a course around a dangerous asteroid field, Nari just closed her eyes and started humming. "There," she said, pointing at his star map. "The deep currents flow strongest here. Your ship will move faster, use less fuel." Lee was skeptical until he tried her route. What should have been a 3-day journey took only 18 hours, and he saved enough fuel to extend his mining operation by 2 weeks. His computer confirmed that space itself seemed to flow differently along the path Nari had chosen. "How did you know that?" Lee asked. Nari touched her forehead, where Lee noticed small silver markings that looked almost like circuit patterns. "We feel the currents the way you feel. Wind on your skin. It is natural for Keth." Lee realized he was traveling with someone who could navigate space the way dolphins navigate ocean currents. Her people didn't need computers or instruments. They could literally feel the invisible forces that moved ships between stars. "Your people must be incredible explorers," Lee said. Nari's glow dimmed a little. "We were. Before the war, before we became afraid. Now we hide, run from system to system. We forgot how to be brave." That evening, Lee showed Nari pictures of Earth on his tablet. He told her about human history, how they'd fought wars, explored dangerous places, and never stopped pushing forward even when things seemed impossible. "Humans sound very foolish," Nari said, but she was smiling when she said it. "Yeah, we probably are," Lee agreed. "But sometimes being foolish is the only way to do something amazing." Nari looked at him thoughtfully. "Like saving a dying stranger." "In space," Lee grinned. "Exactly like that." Lee was showing Nari how to play chess when the proximity alarm started screaming. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace right in front of them, sleek black vessels that looked like they were built for one thing, taking what didn't belong to them. "Pirates," Lee muttered, his hands already flying over the control panel. "Nari, get to the emergency compartment and stay there." But Nari didn't move. She was staring at the ships on the scanner, her skin flickering between bright white and deep blue. "These are the ones," she whispered. "The raiders who destroyed my transport." The communication system crackled to life. "Mining vessel. This is Captain Voss of the Iron Serpent. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. We know you've got valuable cargo aboard." Lee's blood went cold. They weren't just after his mining equipment. Somehow they knew about Nari. Maybe they'd been tracking the alien pod's energy signature. Maybe they had contacts who'd reported the rescue. Either way, Lee wasn't about to hand over the woman he'd spent 2 weeks saving. "Like hell," Lee said, and slammed the engine controls forward. His little mining ship wasn't built for speed, but Lee knew every bolt and wire in her systems. He diverted power from life support, shut down non-essential systems, and pushed the engines past their safety limits. The ship groaned and shook, but she responded. The pirates weren't expecting a mining vessel to run. Most miners just surrendered and hoped for the best. But Lee had been a military engineer before he became a miner, and old habits die hard. "You cannot fight 3 ships, Nari said, gripping her seat as Lee threw them into a wild, evasive pattern. "Watch me," Lee replied, releasing a cloud of mining charges behind them. The explosives weren't designed as weapons, but when the lead pirate ship flew through the cloud, the detonations sent it spinning off course. Lee used every dirty trick he could think of. He dumped his cargo of metal ore, creating a debris field that forced the pirates to slow down. He vented atmosphere from his rear compartments, creating a cloud that confused their targeting systems. When one ship got too close, he fired his mining laser, not powerful enough to destroy a ship, but hot enough to fry their sensor array. But there were still 3 of them, and only one of him. Lee's ship took hit after hit, systems failing one by one. The artificial gravity cut out, sending them floating in their seats. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power systems died. "Hull breach in Section 4, the computer announced in that annoyingly calm voice. "Life support failing." Lee looked at his options and realized he had only one crazy idea left. He started charging up his ship's mining drill, the massive industrial laser used to cut through asteroids. It would take everything he had left to power it, including life support and engines. "Lee, what are you doing?" Nari asked, seeing the power readings. "Something really stupid," Lee said, and spun the ship around to face the pirates head-on. They probably thought he was surrendering, flying straight at them with his engines off. Lee waited until the last possible second, then fired the mining laser at full power. The beam cut through space like a sword made of pure energy, slicing right through the lead pirate ship's engine section. The ship exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness. The other 2 pirates decided they'd had enough. Lee's ship was dead in space, but he'd proven that humans were too crazy and unpredictable to mess with. They grabbed what they could from their destroyed partner and jumped back into hyperspace. Lee and Nari floated in the darkness, breathing recycled air and listening to the ship's systems slowly dying around them. But they were alive. And they were free. "That was the most terrifying and amazing thing I have ever seen," Nari said quietly. Lee just smiled. Welcome to being human. The ship was a mess. Floating in zero gravity, Lee stared at the twisted metal and fried circuits that used to be his navigation system. Without it, they were stuck drifting in empty space, with maybe 3 days of air left. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He'd been working for 12 straight hours trying to get basic life support running again. "Let me help," Nari said, floating over to where Lee was struggling with a bundle of melted wires. "You don't know human technology," Lee replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Nari smiled and placed her glowing hands on the damaged panel. Lee watched in amazement as thin silver lines spread from her fingertips across the metal surface. The lines seemed to map out the electrical pathways, showing exactly where the damage was and how the circuits were supposed to connect. "All technology follows the same deep current," she explained. "Your people build differently than Keth, but energy flows the same way everywhere." Working together, they made an odd team. Lee would strip and splice the wires with his tools, while Nari guided the electrical flow with her natural abilities. What should have taken days was finished in hours. Soon they had lights, air recycling, and enough power to get the engines limping along. During a break, floating in the dim emergency lighting, Nari started talking about her family. Her voice got soft and distant as she described her younger brother Kai, who could sing with whales on ocean worlds, and her mother Vera, who grew the most beautiful crystal gardens in their city. "Kai was always getting into trouble," Nari said, with a sad smile. "He would sneak out to explore dangerous places just like you humans do. Mother said he had a wandering spirit. She worried it would get him killed someday." Lee could hear the pain in her voice. "Maybe he got away too. Maybe he's out there looking for you right now." "Maybe," Nari whispered, but she didn't sound like she believed it. Lee started talking about Earth to distract her from the sadness. He told her about oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, mountains that touched the clouds, and cities full of millions of people all living their own different lives. "But why did you leave?" Nari asked. "If Earth is so beautiful, why come out here to this empty darkness?" Lee thought about it while he worked on rewiring the communication system. "Because we always want to see what's beyond the next hill or the next star. My grandfather used to say that humans are born with itchy feet. We can't sit still for too long." "That sounds lonely," Nari said. "Sometimes it is," Lee admitted, "but it's also exciting. Every day could bring something completely new, like finding a dying alien in a pod." As they worked side by side, Lee realized how perfectly their abilities matched up. His human determination and creativity, combined with her natural understanding of energy and space, made them incredibly effective. Problems that would have been impossible for either of them alone became simple when they worked together. When Nari showed him how to feel the flow of electricity through circuits, Lee taught her how to think like an engineer, breaking big problems into smaller pieces and finding creative solutions with whatever materials were available. "Your people and mine," Nari said as they finished repairing the last damaged system. "We could do amazing things together." "Yeah," Lee agreed, looking at their jury-rigged repairs that somehow worked better than the original systems. "We really could." For the first time since the attack, Lee felt hopeful. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were partners. And together they were stronger than either of their species had ever been alone. With the ship running again, Lee spent days scanning for any trace of Keth energy signatures. The galaxy was huge, and finding Nari's people seemed impossible until she taught him something that changed everything. "Your scanners look for the wrong things," Nari explained, placing her hands on Lee's navigation console. "You search for ships for metal and heat, but Keth vessels flow with the deep currents. Look for the spaces where the currents bend." Lee watched as Nari closed her eyes and let her natural abilities guide the ship's sensors. Suddenly, patterns appeared on his screen that he'd never noticed before, invisible highways of energy that crisscrossed the galaxy. And there, following one of those highways about 4 days away, was a cluster of ships that definitely weren't human. "Found them," Lee said, but his voice didn't sound as happy as it should have. Nari's face lit up with joy, then immediately dimmed when she saw Lee's expression. They both knew what this meant. After weeks of living and working together, sharing stories and fixing impossible problems, it was time to say goodbye. The journey to the rendezvous point was the strangest. 4 days of Lee's life. During the day, Nari taught him things about space navigation that human scientists had never dreamed of. She showed him how gravity wasn't just a force that pulled things together, but a current that could carry ships faster than any engine. "Your people think space is empty," she said, mapping out invisible energy flows on his computer. "But it's full of rivers and streams that have been flowing since the universe began. Learn to read them, and you can travel anywhere." Lee's mind was blown. With Nari's knowledge, human ships could cut travel time in half, maybe more. Colonies that took months to reach could be visited in weeks. It would change everything about how humans explored space. In the evenings, Lee returned the favor by introducing Nari to human culture. He played her music from his personal collection, everything from classical symphonies to rock music to old folk songs his grandmother used to sing. Nari was fascinated by how chaotic human music was compared to Keth songs. "Your melodies fight with each other," she said, listening to a guitar solo, "but somehow they make harmony from the fighting." "That's pretty much how humans do everything," Lee laughed. He showed her digital art from Earth, photographs of sunsets and forests, paintings that captured human emotions in color and shape. Nari studied each image like it was a puzzle she needed to solve. "Humans make beauty from sadness," she observed, looking at a painting of a stormy ocean. "Keth art is always peaceful, always harmonious, but this has power." As they got closer to her people, both of them started finding excuses to delay their arrival. Lee spent extra time checking systems that didn't need checking. Nari suggested longer routes that would better demonstrate the current flows. Neither of them admitted what they were doing, but they both felt time running out. On the last night before they reached the Keith fleet, they sat together in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The silence stretched between them, full of things they couldn't say. "I will tell my people about you," Nari finally said. "About the human who saved my life and asked for nothing in return." "And I'll tell Earth about the Keth," Lee replied, "about the most amazing navigator in the galaxy." But they both knew it wasn't enough. Some connections can't be replaced once. They're broken, and tomorrow they would find out if friendship could survive the vast distances between different worlds. The Keth fleet was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Dozens of ships that looked like they were made of liquid silver floated in perfect formation, their surfaces rippling with patterns of light. Lee had never seen anything so graceful, but something about the rigid precision made him nervous. "They're scanning us," Lee said, watching his instruments light up with unfamiliar energy signatures. Nari was pressed against the viewport, her skin glowing brighter than Lee had ever seen it. "It's really them," she whispered. "After all this time, I'm going home." But when the lead ship's communication came through, Lee immediately knew something was wrong. The voice that spoke in Nari's musical language was cold and formal. Nothing, like the warm tones Lee had grown used to hearing from her. Nari's glow dimmed as she listened. When she responded, her voice sounded small and uncertain. The conversation went on for several minutes, getting more tense with each exchange. "What are they saying?" Lee asked. They want to know why I'm traveling with a primitive species," Nari said quietly, "and they want to know if you've contaminated me with human ideas." Lee felt his temper rising. "Contaminated? I saved your life." A larger ship approached, and Lee found his vessel being pulled aboard by some kind of tractor beam. He didn't like being dragged anywhere, but Nari looked so happy to see her people that he kept his mouth shut. The docking bay was full of Keth, all glowing with that same silver light. But their expressions were nothing like Nari's warm curiosity. They stared at Lee like he was something disgusting they'd found stuck to their shoe. The clan leader, a tall Keth with intricate silver markings covering his face, approached them. He spoke only to Nari, completely ignoring Lee even when introduced. He says his name is Elder Thane, Nari translated reluctantly. He's asking why I didn't die honorably, instead of accepting help from an inferior species. Lee's jaw dropped. "Inferior? Did you tell him I'm the guy who kept you alive for 3 weeks?" When Nari translated, Elder Thane finally looked at Lee. The disgust in his purple eyes was unmistakable. He spoke in heavily accented English, clearly wanting Lee to understand every word. "Human, you have corrupted one of our people with your crude ways. Nari must undergo purification before she can rejoin civilized society." "Purification?" Lee stepped forward, anger making him forget about diplomacy. "What kind of purification?" "Her mind must be cleansed of human influence," Thane said coldly. "Your species' chaotic thinking patterns are like a disease. They must be removed before they spread." Lee looked at Nari, expecting her to defend him, to tell them about everything they'd accomplished together. But she was staring at the deck, her glow fading to almost nothing. "Nari?" Lee said. "They're afraid," she whispered. "The war, the constant running, it's changed them. They used to welcome other species, learn from them. Now they think any outside influence will destroy what's left of our culture." Elder Thane continued his lecture about Keth purity and the dangers of mixing with lesser species. He talked about Nari like she was a broken tool that needed fixing, not a person who had survived impossible odds. Lee watched Nari's face as her people discussed her fate without asking her opinion. The vibrant, curious woman who had learned to love chocolate and human music was shrinking before his eyes, becoming quiet and obedient. "This isn't the homecoming you wanted, is it?" Lee asked quietly. Nari looked up at him with tears in her purple eyes. "They're not the same people I left behind. Fear has made them small." Lee realized that sometimes going home meant discovering that home had changed while you were gone, and sometimes the people you'd become didn't fit in the place you came from anymore. The purification chamber looked like something from Lee's worst nightmares. Banks of crystal devices surrounded a chair that was clearly designed to hold someone against their will. Elder Thane explained in his cold voice that the process would remove human contamination from Nari's mind, erasing weeks of memories and experiences. "It won't hurt," Thane said, like he was talking about fixing a broken machine. "She'll remember her proper place among the Keth and forget the primitive influences that have confused her." Lee felt sick. They wanted to delete everything Nari had learned, everything she'd become during their time together. The woman who had laughed at human music and marveled at chocolate would be erased, replaced by someone who fit their idea of Keth purity. "And if she refuses?" Lee asked. Thane's expression didn't change. "Then she is no longer Keth. She will be exiled, with no clan, no family, no home among her own people." Nari stood between them, looking smaller than Lee had ever seen her. Her glow had faded to barely a flicker, and her shoulders were shaking. The choice was impossible: lose everything she was, or lose everyone she'd ever known. "I need time to think," Nari said quietly. "There is nothing to think about," Thane replied. "You will undergo purification tomorrow, or you will leave this fleet forever." That night, Lee found Nari sitting alone in his ship's observation deck, staring out at the Keth fleet. She hadn't spoken since the meeting with Thane, and her silence was breaking Lee's heart. "You don't have to do this," Lee said, sitting beside her. "There are other options." "Like what?" Nari asked. "Spend my life wandering space, never belonging anywhere? At least if I undergo purification, I'll have a home." "But you won't be you anymore," Lee said. "They want to erase the person I've come to know, the woman who can navigate by starlight and laugh at terrible jokes and fix impossible problems. They want to delete all of that." Nari was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Tell me about Earth again, about the places where different kinds of people live together." Lee talked about cities where humans from every continent worked side by side, about universities where the best ideas came from mixing different perspectives, about how humanity's greatest achievements happened when people brought their unique strengths together. "On Earth, being different isn't something to be cured," Lee said. "It's something to be celebrated." The next morning, the entire Keth clan gathered to witness Nari's purification. But when Elder Thane called her forward, she didn't move toward the chamber. Instead, she walked to where Lee stood at the edge of the crowd. "I choose exile," she said in a voice that carried across the silent bay. The Keth leaders looked shocked. Apparently no one had ever chosen exile over purification before. "You would rather be alone in the void than rejoin your people?" Thane demanded. Nari's glow suddenly blazed brighter than Lee had ever seen it. "I would rather be myself in the company of one true friend than be a hollow copy surrounded by those who fear growth and change. She turned to Lee, her purple eyes shining with determination. If you'll have me, I'd like to learn more about this humanity of yours. I offer my knowledge, my skills, and my loyalty to the species brave enough to value individuals over conformity. Lee felt his chest swell with pride and relief. Welcome to the human race, Nari. I think you're going to fit in perfectly. As they walked back to Lee's ship together, leaving the stunned Keith behind, Lee realized that sometimes family isn't about blood or species. Sometimes it's about finding people who see your worth and choose to stand beside you, no matter what. The cost. 6 months after leaving the Keth fleet, Lee's small mining ship had become something completely different. Half the systems were now a fusion of human engineering and Keth technology, creating something neither species had imagined possible. The navigation console glowed with silver patterns that responded to Nari's touch, while Lee's modifications made their engines twice as efficient as anything else in space. Incoming transmission from Earth Command, the computer announced as they approached the Sol system. Lee grinned at Nari, who was nervously adjusting her translator. This would be her first time meeting other humans, and despite everything they'd been through together, she was still worried about how his people would react to her. "Commander Chen here," came the official voice through the speakers. "Mining vessel Fortune's Edge, you're showing some very unusual energy signatures. Please, explain." "This is Captain Lee," he replied. "I'm bringing home humanity's first alien ally, along with technology that's going to change everything about how we travel through space." The silence that followed was so long that Lee thought they'd lost the connection. Finally, Commander Chen's voice came back, much less official than before. "Did you just say first alien ally?" "Her name is Nari, and she's the reason we made it back here in half the usual time," Lee explained. "She's going to teach us things about space navigation that will revolutionize human exploration." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, demonstrations and bureaucratic paperwork. Earth's leaders couldn't believe what they were seeing. Nari's ability to read space currents allowed human ships to travel routes that should have been impossible, cutting journey times dramatically and opening up star systems that had been too far to reach. But what impressed the scientists most wasn't just her knowledge, it was how she and Lee worked together. During one demonstration, they solved a navigation problem that had puzzled Earth's best engineers for months. Lee would identify the mechanical limitations, while Nari found ways to work with natural forces instead of against them. "It's like watching two halves of the same mind," Dr. Williams from the Space Navigation Institute told Lee after a particularly impressive presentation. "Neither of you could have done this alone." Within a year, Lee and Nari had established the first official human-alien partnership. They were given a new ship, larger and more advanced than Lee's old mining vessel, and tasked with creating trade routes between human colonies and any friendly alien species they could find. Their first major success came when they encountered the Zanari, a peaceful trading species who had been avoiding human space because they thought humans were too aggressive. Nari's diplomatic skills, combined with Lee's practical approach to problem-solving, convinced the Zanari that humans could be trusted partners. "You see," Nari told the Zanari ambassador, while Lee demonstrated human agricultural techniques that could help their food shortage. "Humans fight fiercely to protect what they care about, but they also share freely with those who earn their friendship." Soon, other aliens began seeking out the human-Keth partnership. Lee's reputation for treating everyone fairly, regardless of species, spread through the galaxy's trading networks. Nari became known as the bridge between worlds, helping different species understand human customs and motivations. Their ship became a mobile embassy, carrying diplomats, scientists, and traders between dozens of different worlds. Lee would joke that they were running the galaxy's first interspecies taxi service, but everyone knew they were doing something much more important. 5 years after their first meeting in that drifting escape pod, Lee and Nari stood on the bridge of their ship, watching a fleet of human and alien vessels working together to establish a new space station. It would be the first truly multicultural outpost in known space, a place where different species could live and work side by side. "Not bad for a dying alien and a crazy human," Lee said. Nari smiled, her skin glowing with contentment. "We make a good team." And across the galaxy, that team was proving that the best solutions came not from any single species, but from the courage to reach across the void and offer a helping hand to someone in need.